visiting with you. Kayla, it's been great to get to know you and Matt. Very impressive what Kayla has done. She did not want to be recognized, as her pastor said, but I feel, Rochelle, that I need to, because Kayla, I don't think this would have happened had it not been for you. And I cannot emphasize enough, if we're going to turn our country around, it's going to take people like Kayla getting involved, people like you. So thank you. Very impressed with the facilities. I know we'll be recording. My friend John Dwyer, who's writing The Oklahomans, volume #2, he's writing chapter 20 this morning. It's the last chapter, and he's covering the year 2020. It will come out in November of this year for Statehood Day. He's the official historian for Oklahoma, the Oklahoma Historical Society. Charged in with volume 1, became a bestseller. Volume 2 is even better. And chapter 20, get this now, will be about COVID, and we'll compare Norman, Oklahoma with Enid, Oklahoma, and the two responses. That's the chapter. And so I think everybody in this city, Dudley, Jay, everyone who represents education, politics, city council can be proud of the fact that we are from Enid. I am retired, I'm only 59, so I'm just kind of shifting. I have been at Emmanuel for 30 years, and what I will be doing is writing podcasts. Dinesh D'Souza is helping me with the studio that we're putting in just north of Da Vinci's on Van Buren. And I really think, Eric, the kingdom, Christ's kingdom, is very important to me. But I'm in that situation now where I need to speak even more boldly, and that's not always appropriate from a church setting. And so I feel the Lord has called me to try to help raise the awareness of Americans as to what is going on. Just want to say another word. Pastor Eric's already introduced our politicians from Oklahoma who are here, but I'm just telling you, Denise, you, Kevin, Senator Peterson invited me to be the chaplain for the Senate. And I have to tell you, Roland, when I went down and I saw your faith, Spurgeon used to say, if you want to know a man's character, look at his bookshelf. I looked at your bookshelf and I immediately knew your character. I want to say to you, to Sheriff, to Denise, to Kevin, thank you for this last term. In my opinion, more good was done this last legislative term than in the previous years combined. And a lot of it has to do with the people seated on this second row. In fact, Kevin, I'll tell you this. I watched the debate on the CRT vote, and I watched them attempt to hammer you. And I really appreciate your sense of humor, your calm demeanor. You did a whole lot better than I would have done. So I think we owe another round of applause. Okay, I'm going to use a PowerPoint this morning, and I think the remote is the remote working, Matt? It's not advancing. Oh, Matt's up there. Let's try it one more time. I'll click it off and click it on, and let's see. There we go. No, it's still not advancing. There we go. Did you do that, or did I do that? You did that. All right, here's what we will do. If this doesn't work up there, my code word to advance the slide is Kominsky. Okay? So when I say Kominsky, just advance the slide. Okay? I'm going to explain. How many of you have ever heard of a gentleman called Jan Amos Kominsky? Don't be embarrassed. Lift your hand if you've heard of him. Okay, good. Good. You're going to learn something. I need you to understand my goal is not to tell you everything about one of my heroes. My goal is to whet your appetite to leave this place and do your own research, because I believe an understanding of Kominsky will change the way you view education, whether or not you're involved in public school, private school, or homeschool. Today I want to talk to you about Christianity and character in United States education. One of the quotes of Kominsky is on the screen. Children ought to be dearer to parents than gold and silver, than pearls and gems. Gold and silver are fleeting and transitory. Children, an immortal inheritance. Juan Amos was born in 1592, 100 years after Columbus sailed the ocean blue. He lived to be 78 years of age. He was a refugee from his homeland of Czechoslovakia. Now we call it the Czech Republic. Back when Juan Amos was born, it was called Bohemia. And you might be familiar with the Bohemian Brethren, because from the Bohemian Brethren came John and Charles Wesley as missionaries to the United States of America. Juan Amos Kominsky is his Czech name. His Latinized name is John Amos Comenius. I want to tell you his philosophy of education. And by the time you leave today, I think you will be gripped by what he taught. He transformed Europe. He transformed Great Britain. He transformed America. For 200 years, every educator knew Comenius' name in the United States of America, because his book for children was standard in education at home and in private schools and in public schools. But he has fallen off the charts of memory. Sadly, I will share with you why. Last week in Virginia, there was a teacher in a public school who stood before the board and made a statement, 40 seconds long. I want you to listen to what he said. And when he finishes, I want to ask you a couple of questions about what you think about what he said. Kominsky.
Gender dysphoria. 60 Minutes this past Sunday interviewed over 30 young people who transitioned, but they felt led astray because lack of pushback or how easy it was to make physical changes to their bodies in just 3 months. They are now detransitioning. It's not my intention to hurt anyone, but there are certain truths that we must face when ready. We condemn school policies like 80-40 and 80-35 because it will damage children and defile the holy image of God. I love all of my students, but I will never lie to them regardless of the consequences. I'm a teacher, but I serve God first, and I will not affirm that a biological boy can be a girl and vice versa, because it's against my religion, it's lying to a child, it's abuse to a child, and it's sinning against our God.
He was terminated. Yeah, he was relieved of his duties because he said, I will not affirm that a biological boy can be a girl. And I cannot affirm that a biological girl can be a boy. Now, when you first heard him say that, how did you feel? Did you cringe? Well, most people would probably cringe because they would think, how can he say something like that? He's a public school teacher. I want to convince you, he had every right, thank you, Pastor Eric, to say exactly what he said. There's only one thing I wish he might have changed. Instead of saying, affirming a biological boy can be a girl is against my religion, I wish he would have said, affirming a biological boy can be a girl is against true religion. And I'll explain. Juan Amos Kominski, or as I said, John Amos Comenius, his name in Latin, is the father of modern education. He is the father of American education. He was born March the 28th, 1592 in Bohemia, the Czech Republic, and he died November the 15th, 1670. He lived most of his life in London and in Europe because after the Great White Mountain Battle of 1620, John Comenius had to flee. He was being persecuted for his faith in Bohemia. He left his wife and his child, took as many of the books as he had written as possible. His wife and child and newborn died of the bubonic plague while he was gone. He ended up remarrying, but did not come back to the Czech Republic until he was 70 years old, 8 years before his death, and he had left when he was 28 years old. If you go to the United Nations, you will see Comenius everywhere. In fact, UNESCO, you don't know what UNESCO stands for? Here's the acronym. The United Nations Education, Science, and Culture Organization. UNESCO. Education is first. UNESCO, on their website today, honors John Comenius. Yet most Americans, sadly, know very little about him. Every year, UNESCO awards the teacher who has contributed most to education the Comenius Medal. Yes, that's right, the United Nations. So, who is he? Why should we know who he is? Well, here's why. John Amos Comenius, or Kominski, his Czech name, is the first to advocate for universal education. And when I say the first, I'm not talking about the first in his day, first in his century, first since the time of Christ. I'm talking about the first in the history of the world. Talking about the 1600s. Prior to Comenius, you had a tutor who would teach your children. For example, Socrates taught Plato. Plato taught Aristotle. Aristotle taught Alexander the Great. In fact, I asked Jay what he'd be speaking on. He's going to be talking about the Apostle Paul. In Acts 22, the Bible says the Apostle Paul studied under Gamaliel. Now, it is true that sometimes Gamaliel and not so much Socrates, but Plato, who had an academy, it is true that sometimes you would gather others, like Gamaliel, other than Paul. There would be other Jewish students sitting at the feet of Gamaliel. But it would only be boys, and it would only be boys from families that could pay for it. Ladies, it did not include you. It did not include girls. It did not include the poor. Until Comenius. In fact, during the Middle Ages, education had not changed. You would have schools where a tutor would train boys. The wealthy became the educated. The poor were illiterate. They were the commoners, the slaves. They were the farmers, the peasants. They would raise and harvest the crops of the educated wealthy. This is education in the Middle Age. Women gave birth to children, but could not educate their children because they had no education themselves. Oh, sure, there could be anomalies. crystal and a bowl of sand. A woman who would be educated because a father took it upon himself to educate his daughter. But those were very, very, very rare. That's why we had town criers and bards. Town criers were the people who would come and would cry the news. In fact, the original newspapers in America were called the town criers. Most people in the Middle Ages could not read, so they heard their news orally. This is why Christianity was most of all oral good news. Most people couldn't read. And even if they wanted to read the Bible, they couldn't read Latin, which was the language of the educated. There was no common language of the Scriptures until the Vulgate, which means vulgar or common. And the Latin was turned into the common language of the people. You know what bards were? Bards were those who would come and educate the poor, the peasants, by telling stories orally. Education was through the ear, not through the mind, not through the ability to read. This is what made Comenius so amazing. By the way, just some good news. If you've never heard of him and you think, I'm just giving you a bunch of hogwash, just go in JSTOR, the academic site, or go Google it. You can Google Comenius, and you will probably have 10,000 articles that will come up, and nobody talks about him today. If you go to the Czech Republic, he is the national hero. His face is on their $20 bill. Everyone in the Czech Republic knows of Comenius. One of my desires is to make sure everyone in America knows of Comenius, including our very brave and courageous politicians. That's why this Thanksgiving, a new English translation of a book that Comenius wrote when he was in his 20s, called The Labyrinth of the World and the Paradise of the Heart, will be translated in a new modern English version by myself and a friend of mine who've been working on it for about 5 years, with new illustrations from an artist in Brazil. It is a book that every person should possess and every parent should read to their children. John Bunyan was so captivated by Comenius's work, which he could read in the original Latin, that he copied and wrote Pilgrim's Progress based upon the labyrinth of the world and the paradise of the heart. That will be out this Thanksgiving 2021. Let me tell you what Comenius taught. He taught that the goal of education is wisdom. Now follow me here. I don't want you to get lost, because I'm building a platform upon which I think a Kevin who stands on the floor of a legislature to attempt to ban critical race theory from being taught in public schools. What I'm about to build for you becomes the very energy to stand up and say, come on guys, I've got truth on my side, I've got history on my side, I've got creation on my side, I have God on my side, and I will not compromise. This is the platform. He taught that the goal of education is wisdom, and this is what he said. If you want to educate a child, called pedagogy, if you want to educate a child, you've got to teach this child 3 things. How to relate to creation, that's science. How to relate with culture, that's philosophy. And how to relate to the Creator, that's religion. Comenius said you teach science through observation. We call it the scientific method. You teach relating to culture or philosophy through morals. And you teach how to relate well to the Creator through religion. He called it the Christian faith. So, Comenius taught the unified theory of education. As you know, Einstein always looked for the unified theory in science. Even today, modern scientists are looking for a unified theory that will merge chemistry and physics and so on. Comenius said, you will never educate properly a child until you follow the unified theory of education. You have to unify science, philosophy, and religious knowledge into an all-embracing, harmonious Christian worldview. Wow. Now, can you believe that the United Nations used the Comenius Award? He called the proper teaching of children Pansophia. It's a Greek word. Pan means all. Sophia means wisdom. You must teach all wisdom. The wisdom that you get from science in relating to creation. The wisdom you get from culture through your morality in doing what is good for other people. And culture for your community. And you are educated when you relate well to your Creator because He created you and you are returning to Him. And you will never be an educated human being until Pansophia is unified in your mind. At the core of Comenius' educational plan was the installation of piety, virtue, and familiarity. Now look at this next phrase, and I'm quoting from Comenius. The marrow of the Bible, the substance which is to be believed, done and hoped for according to the clear doctrine of the Bible. Comenius said you could measure success in how well you were educating children. You could measure pedagogy, the education of children, homeschool, public school, private school. He didn't separate them back then. But you can measure your success this way. He loved threes. If a child is beginning to know all things, tangibly, through language, common language, he knows what objects are, what the universe is. By the way, this is his children's book that for 200 years was used by every family in America, including Abraham Lincoln, who had no formal education, but he read Comenius' book as a child because his mother read it to him. He taught that you had to know all things scientifically through language and scientific observation of objects, which would lead then to self-control, which is how you relate to culture. It's your morality. Comenius taught that if students do not get themselves under self-control, culture will collapse. Because morality is about making your relationships with other human beings the way God intended them to be. And then, he said, the third and highest step is becoming God's image, meaning more like Christ. Now, look at this. These are the three levels of education: science, morality, religion. Pansophia. So when that teacher in Virginia last week says, I cannot affirm that a biological male can be a female because it is against true religion. Now, where did Comenius teach this? Where can you find what he taught? And remember, the United Nations honors him today on their website. They give out the Comenius Medal. Man, I'm sure, Pastor Eric, if anybody at the United Nations ever hears this talk, that'll be coming down really quick. Okay? But before they take it down, where can you find what he taught? Well, in 1635, he wrote a book. Now, you can buy it at Amazon. Now, I'm going to give you the title of the book. It's 135 words long. Listen to it. The Great Didactic, setting forth the whole art of teaching all things to all men, or a certain inducement to found such schools in all the parishes, towns, and villages of every Christian kingdom, that the entire youth of both sexes, none being excepted, shall quickly, pleasantly, and thoroughly become learned in the sciences, pure in morals, trained in piety, and in this manner instructed in all things necessary for the present and for the future life, in which, with respect to everything that is suggested, its fundamental principles are set forth from the essential nature of matter. Its truth is proved by examples from the several mechanical arts, its order clearly set forth in years, months, days, and hours, and finally an easy method is shown by which it can be pleasantly brought into existence. That's the title of the book. It's abbreviated the Great Didactic. It is incredible. In the book, Comenius proposed 4 levels of education. The maternal school. He clearly shows that from birth through age 6, the mother is key to instructing children. Now someone might say, well, what about the father? You have to read the Great Didactic. He says that the father has his role, but the maternal school, and he shows you why in the Great Didactic, is necessary from birth through 6. This is why he wrote his first children's book to assist mothers in teaching their children. Then the vernacular school. Vernacular means common language school. Remember Aristotle, Socrates, Plato? Remember the schools for wealthy young men? They would teach, particularly in the Middle Ages, after the time of Socrates, they would teach Latin. Latin was a language that was only spoken by the clerics and by the educated, not by the common people. Comenius comes along and says, that's a mistake. You've got to teach what we would call grade school and middle school. You've got to teach people in their language, the sciences. Then when he went to high school, he called it Latin school. In high school, he showed why it was important to learn Greek, Latin, Hebrew, and English. And why would you learn Greek and Hebrew? Because it's the written language of the Holy Scriptures. And then the academy, which we call college, where at college you become more like Christ. His book, The Great Didactic, caused such a sensation. Parliament in London asked him to reform the schools in London. Sweden then asked him to come and reform their schools. Then America reached out, John Winthrop, and said, Comenius, we're starting a school called Harvard University, the first academy in America. Will you come and be its president? He turned them down because he wanted to reform education in England and Europe. And boy, he began to do it. He wrote over 200 books. And the government assemblies of those nations began to implement what he suggested. And then, all of a sudden, it was interrupted by war. The English Civil War caused the government of England to be divided. And as a result, as you know, in our modern day, a house which is divided cannot stand. Education was set on the back burner. Shortly after the English Civil War, as in the ashes of the ruin of the government of England, the Industrial Revolution was launched. And there were businessmen in London and in Paris, in all the great cities of Europe, who, though they knew of Comenius, and though they understood what he was saying about universal education and gave lip service to it, greed, capitalism, caused them to forbid the implementation of Comenius' rules of education because the children were needed in the factories. But there is one country that took Comenius' ideas and went to town on them and became a great country. The United States of America. But let me tell you how it happened. For those of you who are in public school education, you probably know the history of public education, but you may not know that for at least 150 years, public education was nothing in America. It was all either home education, as in Lincoln's case, or it was education in churches. In fact, this is very personal to me, and I don't have but about 10 more minutes, and I want to take maybe Kayla, a couple of questions, if it's possible. But let me tell you about Sunday school. Robert Rakes, who lived less than a century after Comenius died in 1670, he took the works of Comenius. He was a layman, and he was so moved by the great didactic and the belief in universal education that during the days of Dickens, The Tale of Two Cities, London and Paris, how the poor kids were illiterate, working in the factories. If you've ever read The Tale of Two Cities, it's just a horrific account of culture in the 1700s. Robert Rakes picked up Comenius and began to read, and he said, I've got to do something about this. And so this Anglican layman formed the first Sunday school in 1780 in London, England. By the way, I think this is so cool. His great-great-granddaughter, Robert Rakes' great-great-granddaughter, lives here in England and is a member of our church. The reason it's personal to me is when Robert Rakes started Sunday school. Pastor Eric, you don't have Sunday school here?
Yes, we do.
When Robert Rakes started Sunday school, he said, infinite will be the benefit. Because what you would do is you would bring all the children, the poor, girls and boys, you would bring them to the churches in London, and you would instruct them in morality and science and philosophy. You would teach them the scriptures, and Sunday school became a school on Sunday. Why Sunday? Because the kids were working Monday through Saturday. Let me tell you something, Dr. Glazier. I'm on Twitter. I wish I wasn't on Twitter. You know, all these kids who post their selfies, their new lipstick, their new makeup, their new hairdo, all the stuff, me, and then complain about not getting the new iPhone. I'm like, are you kidding me? In the 1700s, kids your age were working Monday through Saturday at the factories. Now, I'm not advocating that at all. I'm just saying that is what culture was. And here comes Sunday school. The reason this is personal to me is my great-great-grandfather, pictured here. So on my mom's side, his name is Charles Cherry. He was converted as a child in a London Sunday school class. His name is Charles Tinsley Cherry. His conversion impacted him